I was reviewing quarterly compliance reports at my desk when my phone started buzzing like a trapped hornet. Notification after notification flooded my screen. I opened Facebook and froze. There I was, on a live stream, sitting at my cubicle completely unaware. The CEO's nephew, Brandon, stood in front of my desk with a champagne bottle, filming himself. 2 security guards flanked him. He pointed directly at the camera, then at me. "Out with the old, in with the new," he shouted, popping the champagne. 200 employees were watching live. The comments exploded with laughing emojis. My 15 years of service ended in 60 seconds of viral humiliation. The stream already had 4,000 views. My hands trembled as I set down my phone. This could not be real. This could not be happening to me. My name is Catherine. And up until that moment, I thought I knew exactly where my life was going. I started at Pacific Commerce Bank 15 years ago as a teller at the downtown branch. I was 20 years old, fresh out of community college, with an associate degree in business administration. I worked every shift they offered, took every training course available, and studied for my certification exams at night. 5 years in, I became an assistant compliance officer. 10 years in, I was promoted to senior compliance officer. For the past 6 months, I had been the only authorized signatory for anti-money laundering transaction approvals after our chief compliance officer, Bernard Santos, retired to Florida. Pacific Commerce Bank was not some massive national institution. We were a regional bank with 47 branches across Oregon, Washington, and Northern California. We served local businesses, families saving for their first homes, retirees managing their nest eggs. I knew our customers. I knew our systems. I knew every single regulation that governed our operations because I had spent 15 years learning them. The CEO, Harold Whitmore, was 68 years old and had run the bank for 23 years. He was old school, cautious, risk-averse. 6 months ago, when Bernard retired, Harold called me into his office. He told me I was doing an excellent job. He said the Chief Compliance Officer title would be mine very soon. He just needed to get some things in order first. I believed him. I waited patiently, did my job flawlessly, and trusted that my work would speak for itself. Then, 3 months ago, everything changed. Harold's nephew, Brandon Whitmore, joined the bank as Chief Operating Officer. Brandon was 27 years old. His entire professional experience consisted of 2 years at a tech startup in San Francisco that had burned through venture capital before collapsing. He had a business degree from a decent school and an ego the size of Mount Hood. From day one, Brandon made it clear he was there to modernize the bank. He talked constantly about disrupting traditional banking and moving at startup speed. He rolled his eyes whenever I mentioned regulatory requirements. He called compliance red tape and innovation killers. He pushed vendors through approval processes without proper due diligence. He pressured staff to cut corners on documentation. I raised concerns. I sent emails to Harold outlining the risks. I explained that banking regulations exist for good reasons, that shortcuts could result in massive fines, that we had a responsibility to our customers and to federal oversight agencies. Harold's responses were always the same. Brandon is bringing fresh perspectives. Let's give him room to implement his vision. We need to evolve. This morning, everything came to a head. Brandon called me into the conference room at 8:30. He did not offer me a seat. He stood with his arms crossed, looking at me like I was something stuck to the bottom of his shoe. "Catherine, your approach is killing our momentum," he said. "Every time I try to move us forward, you throw up roadblocks. You're stuck in this paperwork mentality that doesn't work in the modern business environment." I kept my voice steady. Brandon, I understand you want to move quickly, but we operate under federal banking regulations, the Bank Secrecy Act, the USA Patriot Act, anti-money laundering statutes. These are not optional. If we violate them, we face enormous fines and potentially criminal charges. He waved his hand dismissively. That's fear-based thinking. We need to take calculated risks. There's nothing calculated about ignoring federal law, I replied. His expression hardened. This isn't working out. We're going in a different direction. You're terminated, effective immediately. The words hit me like cold water. Excuse me? You're fired. Security will escort you out. Clean out your desk. Brandon, you can't just fire the senior compliance officer without cause. There are protocols. I'm the COO. I can absolutely make personnel decisions. This conversation is over. He opened the conference room door. 2 security guards stood waiting. My coworkers stared as I was walked back to my desk. That was when I noticed Brandon holding up his phone, filming. He was narrating the whole thing like some kind of corporate reality show. He posted it to Facebook Live with the caption, "Making tough calls, #leadership, #innovation, #out with the old." The security guards stood over me while I packed my personal items into a cardboard box. A framed photo of my parents. A coffee mug my best friend Angela gave me for my 10th work anniversary. My certifications hanging on the cubicle wall. 15 years reduced to a box of trinkets. No one made eye contact as I walked toward the exit. Angela caught my eye from across the floor. She looked horrified, but she did not move. No one did. Everyone was terrified of being next. I sat in my car in the parking lot for 20 minutes, unable to turn the key in the ignition. My phone kept buzzing. Text messages from Angela. "I'm so sorry. This is insane." From Marcus in IT. "Kat, this is wrong. We all know it." From people I had not talked to in years who saw the video. I drove home in a daze. I lived alone in a small house in a quiet neighborhood. I had bought it 5 years ago, proud of what I had accomplished. Now I walked through the front door and stood in my living room, still holding the cardboard box, trying to understand what had just happened to my life. At 12:30, my phone rang. It was Angela, and she was whispering, "Catherine, something weird is happening. Brandon just tried to approve a wire transfer for $850,000 to some new vendor I've never heard of. The system rejected it. He's losing his mind. He's screaming at IT, saying the system is broken." Something clicked in my brain. A cold, clear realization. "Angela, what's the transaction amount?" $850,000. "Why?" I started laughing. Not happy laughter. The kind of laughter that comes when the universe reveals its sense of irony. "Angela, I'm the only authorized signatory in the AML system for transactions over $500,000. Brandon doesn't have approval authority. Neither does Harold. The system requires my biometric signature and employee credentials to process anything above that threshold. And because of how federal banking regulations work, they can't just assign a new signatory. It requires a 30-day review period by federal regulators." There was silence on the other end. Then Angela whispered, "Oh my God, he just froze the entire bank." At exactly 1 o'clock in the afternoon, I received an automated email from Pacific Commerce Bank's transaction management system. The subject line read, "Transaction approval request queue, 23 items, pending authorized signatory review." I stared at the email. My credentials should have been deactivated the moment I was terminated. But IT had not processed my termination paperwork yet. The system still recognized me as an active employee. More importantly, it still recognized me as the sole authorized AML signatory. I opened my laptop and logged into the system remotely. I probably should not have had access anymore, but there I was, looking at a queue of 23 pending transactions, all waiting for my approval. Wire transfers, vendor payments, loan disbursements. Everything over $500,000 had ground to a complete halt. The largest item was Brandon's $850,000 payment to something called Apex Strategic Marketing Solutions. I had never heard of this company. I clicked through to the vendor file. It had been created 2 months ago. Minimal documentation. The business address was a UPS store in Portland. The approval chain showed Brandon had pushed it through over the objections of 3 different people in accounts payable. My phone buzzed with a text from Angela. Brandon is in Harold's office. They're both shouting. The bank's attorney just showed up. I scrolled through the other pending transactions. Most of them looked legitimate. Payroll for headquarters staff. A $2 million construction loan disbursement that was due today. Monthly vendor payments for IT services, facility maintenance, insurance premiums. Real business operations that kept the bank running. But buried among the legitimate transactions, I spotted 2 more that raised red flags. A $600,000 payment to Lighthouse Consulting Group. Another for $720,000 to Summit Advisory Partners. Both companies registered recently, both with minimal documentation, both pushed through approval chains by Brandon. At 1:30, Angela called again. The attorney just explained it to them. Because you were fired without proper succession planning, and because you're the only authorized signatory in the AML system, they legally cannot process these transactions until either you're reinstated and approve them, or they complete a 30-day federal regulatory review to assign someone new. What did Brandon say? I asked. He said they should just override the system. The attorney practically yelled at him. She said that would be a federal banking violation. She said they could face massive fines and potentially criminal charges. She said the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency does not mess around with banks that bypass AML controls. I felt something shifting inside me. Not quite satisfaction. Not yet. But something close to it. A sense that maybe, just maybe, doing the right thing for 15 years was about to matter. At 2 o'clock, my phone rang. Harold's number. I almost did not answer. But curiosity got the better of me. Catherine. His voice was strained. We need to talk. Do we? There's been a misunderstanding. Brandon acted hastily. He's young. He's enthusiastic. Sometimes he moves too quickly without considering all the angles. He fired me on Facebook Live, Harold. Yes, that was inappropriate. We're going to have a conversation with him about professionalism. I said nothing. Catherine, we have 23 transactions frozen. Payroll for our executive staff. A construction loan that has penalty clauses if we don't disburse today. Critical vendor payments. We need your help. My help. We'd like you to approve the pending transactions. As a gesture of goodwill, we'll offer you 2 months of severance. I let the silence stretch out. Harold was not apologizing. He was not offering me my job back. He was trying to buy my cooperation on the cheap. Am I still fired? I asked. He hesitated. We need to discuss the details of your departure. That sounds like a yes. Catherine, please, be reasonable. I'll think about it, I said, and hung up. For the next 2 hours, I did something I had gotten very good at over 15 years. I researched. I pulled up every piece of information I had on the 3 suspicious vendor payments. I searched business registries. I looked up corporate filings. I cross-referenced addresses and principal owners. Apex Strategic Marketing Solutions, the company Brandon was trying to send $850,000 to, was registered in Delaware 2 months ago. The principal owner was listed as Jason Hendricks. I searched Jason Hendricks. His LinkedIn profile showed he graduated from the same college as Brandon, same year. His Facebook profile, which was public, showed multiple photos of him and Brandon together at parties, sporting events, and ski trips. They were best friends. Lighthouse Consulting Group and Summit Advisory Partners showed similar patterns. Recently registered shell companies with minimal operational history and connections to Brandon's social circle. At 4 o'clock, I received an email that made my blood run cold. It came to my personal email address, not my work account. The sender was Patricia Morrison, a partner at Hightower Auditing Associates. Hightower was the external auditing firm that conducted quarterly compliance reviews for Pacific Commerce Bank. The email was short. Miss Catherine, I'm conducting the quarterly compliance audit for Pacific Commerce Bank. I've noticed irregularities in several recent vendor approvals that bypassed normal protocols. These transactions were processed during your tenure as Senior Compliance Officer. I need to speak with you urgently. Based on what I've seen, this may constitute fraud, and as the Compliance Officer of record, you may be implicated. Please contact me at your earliest convenience. I read the email 3 times. Brandon had not just gotten me fired. He had been pushing fraudulent payments through the system for weeks, and because I was the compliance officer of record, I could be held responsible. If federal investigators came looking for someone to blame, my name was on every compliance report, every audit, every oversight document. Brandon had not just humiliated me. He had set me up to take the fall for his crimes. I did not sleep that night. I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop, reviewing every transaction that had gone through Pacific Commerce Bank in the past 3 months. I kept meticulous personal backups of all compliance documents because I had learned early in my career that covering yourself was not paranoia, it was survival. What I found was worse than I imagined. Brandon had been systematically pushing through suspicious vendor payments since he arrived. 6 payments totaling $3.2 million had gone to shell companies over a 12-week period. Every single one had raised red flags. Every single one had been flagged by junior staff. Every single one had been overridden by Brandon. I found emails I had sent to Harold. Harold, I'm concerned about the approval chain for Lighthouse Consulting. We have no prior relationship with this vendor, no references, and minimal documentation of services rendered. I recommend we hold this payment pending additional verification. Harold's response. Brandon assures me this is a legitimate strategic consulting engagement. Please process. Another email. Harold, we've now processed 4 payments to newly registered vendors with similar profiles. This pattern is consistent with potential money laundering or fraud schemes. I strongly recommend we pause all payments to vendors registered within the past 6 months until we can conduct proper due diligence. Harold's response. Catherine, I appreciate your diligence, but Brandon is bringing in outside expertise to help us modernize. We need to trust his judgment and move forward. I had documented everything. I had raised every concern. I had been ignored at every turn. At 7 in the morning, I was still at my kitchen table, running on coffee and anger, when my phone lit up with notifications. The Facebook Live video of my firing had gone viral. 23,000 shares overnight. The local news had picked it up. The headline on KGW Portland, Bank Executive Humiliates Employee in Viral Firing Video. The public relations disaster was unfolding in real time. Comments poured in condemning Brandon and Pacific Commerce Bank. People were calling for boycotts. Customers were posting about closing their accounts. The bank's official Facebook page was flooded with angry messages. At 8 o'clock, Harold called again. This time, he sounded desperate. "Catherine, we need you back. Immediately." "Do you?" "Yes. We're prepared to offer you your old position back, plus 3 months of severance pay." "My old position? As senior compliance officer?" "Yes." "What about the chief compliance officer title you promised me 6 months ago?" He hesitated. "We can discuss a promotion track once things settle down." "What about Brandon? Will he be held accountable for his actions?" "Brandon made an error in judgment, but he's family. We'll provide additional training and oversight." "Training and oversight." "Catherine, please, we need to move past this." "Harold, what about the suspicious vendor payments I flagged? The ones you told me to process?" His voice hardened. "Those payments were approved through proper channels. Don't create problems where none exist. So I'm supposed to come back, approve all the frozen transactions, including Brandon's fraudulent payments, accept a demotion from the title I was promised, work alongside the man who humiliated me on social media, and pretend everything is fine? I'm trying to be reasonable here." "No, Harold. You're trying to protect your nephew and save your bank. Those are not the same thing as being reasonable." I hung up. At 9 o'clock, Patricia Morrison called me directly. "Miss Catherine, thank you for responding to my email," she began. Her voice was professional but not unkind. "I need to explain the situation. The suspicious vendor payments that went through Pacific Commerce Bank over the past 3 months were flagged by the Federal Reserve's automated monitoring system. An investigation is being opened. As the senior compliance officer of record, you are currently listed as a person of interest in this investigation." My stomach dropped. "I flagged those payments. I raised concerns to the CEO. I have documentation." "That's very good. Off the record, if you have documentation showing you raised appropriate concerns and were overruled, now is the time to organize it and prepare to present it to investigators. The Office of the Comptroller of the Currency will want to speak with you." "Am I in legal trouble?" "I can't answer that definitively. But if you cooperated with fraud, even under pressure, you could face charges. If you tried to stop it and were overruled, that changes the situation significantly. Documentation is your best protection." After we hung up, I sat very still, absorbing what she had said. This was not just about losing my job anymore. This was about potentially losing my freedom. At 10 o'clock, Angela sent me a screenshot of an internal memo. It was from Brandon to all staff. The subject line read, "Clarification regarding recent personnel changes." The memo was a masterpiece of manipulation. Brandon wrote that I had been terminated due to performance concerns and possible involvement in irregular financial activities. He claimed that I was unethically leveraging system access to hold the bank hostage. He suggested that the pending transaction freeze was part of my attempt to sabotage operations in retaliation for justified termination. He was building a narrative. He was painting me as the criminal. My phone rang. Unknown number. I answered. "Miss Catherine?" A woman's voice, young and frightened. "This is Sarah Wellington. I work in wire transfers." "I don't know if you remember me." "I remember you, Sarah." She was 24, a single mom, had been with the bank for 3 years. She was crying. "Brandon made me approve those payments, the ones to the consulting companies. He said you and Harold had already signed off. He sent me emails saying it was urgent, that the CEO needed them processed immediately. He said if I delayed them, I'd be fired. I'm a single mom. I have a 4-year-old son." I couldn't lose this job. Sarah, slow down. What's happening? Brandon's internal memo says the wire transfers were processed without proper authorization. He's saying that I might have been involved in fraudulent activity. Miss Catherine, I have the emails where he threatened my job. I did what he told me to do. But now they're saying I might go to jail. Please, you have to help me. I know you were always fair. You were always on our side. Something crystallized inside me at that moment. Brandon had not just destroyed my reputation. He was setting up junior employees, people with no power and no protection, to take the fall for his crimes. Sarah Wellington was a single mother making $42,000 a year, trying to support her kid, and Brandon was going to throw her to federal prosecutors to save himself. Sarah, listen to me very carefully. Do not delete any emails. Do not talk to Brandon or anyone from management without a lawyer present. I'm going to help you. I promise. After I hung up, I sat at my kitchen table and made a decision. This was not about me anymore. This was about Sarah and every other person Brandon was willing to sacrifice. This was about doing what was right, even if it cost me everything. I was not going to approve those transactions. I was not going to save Brandon. I was going to bring him down. At 11 o'clock, I called Patricia Morrison back. Miss Morrison, I want to cooperate fully with any investigation. I have extensive documentation showing that I repeatedly raised concerns about the suspicious vendor payments and that I was overruled by the chief operating officer and the CEO. I also have evidence that junior employees were coerced into processing transactions under threat of termination. There was a pause. That's very significant information. Can you meet with federal investigators? Yes, as soon as possible. I'll arrange a meeting with the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency. Tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock. Federal Building downtown. Can you make that? I'll be there. After we hung up, I spent the next 3 hours organizing my documentation. 15 months of emails, compliance reports showing proper protocols and how they were violated, records of vendor payments with my notes flagging irregularities, Brandon's emails pressuring me to stop being a bottleneck and speed up approvals, Harold's responses dismissing my concerns. I compiled everything into a single organized file. Dates, times, dollar amounts, names. A complete record of how I had tried to protect the bank and been shut down at every turn. At 2 o'clock, I received another email from Harold. The subject line read, "Final offer. Catherine, we are prepared to make a one-time offer. Chief Compliance Officer title. Effective immediately. 20% salary increase. 4 months of severance pay. In exchange, you will sign a non-disclosure agreement, release Pacific Commerce Bank from any and all liability related to your termination, and approve all pending transactions by 5 o'clock today. This offer expires at 5 o'clock and will not be renewed." The catch was obvious. They wanted me to approve the fraudulent transactions and sign away my ability to cooperate with investigators. If I signed that NDA and approved those payments, I would be complicit. I would be guilty. I called the employment attorney Angela had recommended. His name was James Patterson, and he had a reputation for taking on banks in wrongful termination cases. I explained the situation. He listened carefully, asked detailed questions, and then said, "Do not sign anything. Do not approve any transactions. If you sign that NDA and approve payments you know are fraudulent, you become criminally liable. They're trying to make you an accomplice to protect themselves. What should I do? Let the transactions stay frozen. Cooperate with the federal investigation. The bank is in crisis mode. They're going to have to make real concessions soon, and when they do, you'll have leverage. At 4:30, my phone buzzed with a notification. A local business reporter named Diana Foster had posted on Twitter, working on a story about the viral bank firing video. Looking to speak with Catherine or anyone with information about what's happening at Pacific Commerce Bank. Hearing rumors about compliance issues. DM me. I screenshot the tweet and sat staring at it. Going to the media was risky, but Brandon was controlling the narrative inside the bank. He was painting me as the problem. If I did not tell my side of the story, his version would become the truth. That evening, Brandon posted on LinkedIn. It was a carefully crafted statement that made my skin crawl. Leadership requires making difficult decisions. Today, I made the tough call to terminate an employee who was impeding critical business operations and is now suspected of financial misconduct. I take no pleasure in these decisions, but the integrity of our institution must come first. Moving forward, we remain committed to transparency, accountability, and doing what's right for our customers and stakeholders. The comments section filled up with business influencers praising his courage and tough leadership. People who knew nothing about banking regulations or what had actually happened were applauding him for firing me. I barely slept again that night. The next morning at 8 o'clock, I met James Patterson outside the federal building in downtown Portland. He briefed me on what to expect. Be honest, be thorough, don't speculate. Stick to what you know and what you can document. At 9 o'clock, I was sitting in a conference room with Patricia Morrison and 2 investigators from the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency. They were professional, precise, and very serious. They asked me to walk them through everything. I presented my documentation. I explained the approval processes that were supposed to be followed. I showed them the emails where I raised concerns. I showed them Brandon's responses pressuring me to move faster. I showed them Harold's dismissals of my warnings. They asked detailed questions. How long had I been the authorized signatory? What were the normal protocols for vendor approvals? When did I first notice irregularities? What actions did I take? One of the investigators, a woman named Agent Ross, leaned forward. Miss? Catherine, you're aware that you could potentially be charged as an accessory if it's determined that you knowingly facilitated fraud. I did not facilitate fraud. I tried to stop it. I have documentation proving I raised concerns repeatedly and was overruled by senior management, but you remained in your position. You continued processing transactions. I processed transactions that I believed were legitimate. I flagged the ones that raised concerns. I did my job. When I was overruled by the CEO, I documented my objections. What else was I supposed to do? Agent Ross nodded. That's a fair answer. Based on what you've presented, it appears you acted appropriately within your authority. The other investigator asked, Are you willing to testify if charges are filed? Yes, absolutely. They asked me not to approve any pending transactions until their investigation concluded. They told me I was a witness, not a target. They thanked me for my cooperation. As I was leaving the federal building at 10:15, my phone rang. It was Marcus from IT. Catherine, you need to know what just happened. Brandon just fired Sarah Wellington. He's claiming she processed fraudulent wire transfers without authorization. Police showed up. They arrested her at her desk. They're making her the scapegoat. Everything inside me went cold. Sarah Wellington, a single mother making barely enough to get by, was being arrested while Brandon walked free. Where did they take her? County jail, I think. Catherine, this is insane. Everyone knows Brandon pressured her. I hung up and immediately called James Patterson. They arrested Sarah Wellington. We need to help her. Now. James Patterson agreed to represent Sarah pro bono after I explained the situation. By noon, he had her released on bail. By 1 o'clock, we were sitting in his office reviewing the emails Brandon had sent Sarah threatening her job if she did not process the wire transfers immediately. "This is coercion," James said. "She has a clear defense, but we need to go public with this. The bank is trying to control the narrative by making arrests before the truth comes out." I pulled out my phone and called Diana Foster, the business reporter. "Miss Foster, this is Catherine. I'm ready to talk. On the record." We met at a coffee shop 2 hours later. I brought copies of everything I could legally share without violating the investigation. I walked her through the whole story, 15 years of building my career. Brandon's arrival and his disregard for regulations. The suspicious vendor payments I flagged. Harold's dismissals of my concerns. The Facebook Live firing. The AML freeze. Sarah's arrest. I did not reveal details of the federal investigation because I had been asked not to. But I made it absolutely clear that I had tried to protect the bank, that I had been ignored, and that I was fired when I became inconvenient. Diana took detailed notes. She recorded our conversation with my permission. She asked smart questions. She had clearly done her homework on banking regulations and compliance requirements. "This is a hell of a story," she said. "Give me until tomorrow morning. I'll have it on the front page of the business section." That evening, I received a forwarded email from Angela. It was an internal message from Harold to the board of directors. Angela's boyfriend worked in the executive suite and had access to board communications. The email was marked confidential, but Angela sent it anyway. Harold wrote, "The current situation with the transaction freeze is causing significant operational disruptions. We have now incurred $50,000 in late fees on a major construction loan. 3 large commercial clients have indicated they may move their business to other institutions. Employee morale is extremely low following the viral video incident. I recommend we consider immediate reinstatement of Catherine with appropriate title and compensation adjustments to resolve the freeze and minimize further damage." One of the board members had replied, "What about Brandon? His judgment appears questionable at best." Harold's response, "Brandon is young and learning. I believe with proper guidance, he can mature into the role. He is family, and I'm committed to supporting his development." Even facing a crisis, Harold was protecting Brandon. The next morning, Diana's article went live. Front page of the business section, both print and online. The headline read, "Viral firing backfires. Bank executives' humiliation tactic triggers compliance crisis." The article was thorough and damning. It detailed my 15-year career, my spotless record, my multiple certifications. It explained how Brandon, despite minimal banking experience, had been given authority he was not qualified to handle. It described the suspicious vendor payments I had flagged and how my concerns had been dismissed. It explained the AML freeze and how it was a direct result of firing the only authorized signatory without proper succession planning. It included quotes from former colleagues praising my integrity and competence. The article embedded the Facebook Live video and juxtaposed it with statements from banking compliance experts about the importance of experienced compliance officers and the dangers of cutting regulatory corners. The final paragraph quoted an anonymous board member. "This situation represents a catastrophic failure of judgment at the executive level. Heads will roll." The article went viral faster than the firing video had. By noon, it had been shared 15,000 times. By evening, it was trending on Twitter. TikTok videos analyzed the situation, with compliance professionals and employment lawyers breaking down everything that had gone wrong. LinkedIn exploded with posts from banking industry professionals expressing outrage. Former employees of Pacific Commerce Bank started coming forward with their own stories. A woman who had worked under Brandon for 6 weeks posted, "He called compliance officers fun police and bragged about how he was going to shake things up. He had no respect for people with decades of experience." Another former employee, he once said in a meeting that banking regulations were suggestions for scared people. I quit 2 weeks later. The hashtag Justice for Catherine started trending. That evening, Angela called me. She was whispering again, but this time she sounded almost gleeful. "Emergency board meeting. Right now, Harold and Brandon are in there. The board is furious. I've never seen anything like this." "What are they saying?" "I can't hear details, but Harold came out looking like he aged 10 years. Brandon was yelling something about how this is all unfair and people are overreacting. One of the board members told him to shut up. Catherine, I think they're done." The next morning at 9 o'clock, Pacific Commerce Bank issued a press release. Harold Whitmore was stepping down as CEO, effective immediately, to spend more time with family. The board had appointed Elizabeth Hartman as interim CEO. Elizabeth was the former chief risk officer, a woman in her mid-50s with 30 years of banking experience and a reputation for absolute integrity. Her first official act, announced in the same press release, was to suspend Brandon pending a full internal investigation into operational and compliance concerns. At 2 o'clock that afternoon, my phone rang. The caller ID showed Pacific Commerce Bank's main number. I almost did not answer, but curiosity won. "Miss Catherine, this is Elizabeth Hartman. I've just been appointed interim CEO. Do you have a few minutes to talk?" "I'm listening." "I've spent the morning reviewing your personnel file and the circumstances of your termination. I've also reviewed the compliance reports you filed over the past year and the concerns you raised about vendor approval processes. I want you to know that your termination was unjust and should never have happened." I said nothing, waiting. "I'm offering you the position of Chief Compliance Officer, effective immediately, with full authority to restructure the compliance department as you see fit. I'm also asking you to serve as interim general counsel until we can hire someone appropriate. We need someone with your integrity and experience to help us navigate this crisis. The question is, can you forgive this institution for how you were treated? Can you come back and help us make this right?" I sat in my living room, looking out the window at my quiet street. 3 days ago, I had been humiliated on Facebook Live and fired. Now the CEO was asking me to save the bank. "Miss Hartman, I appreciate the offer, but I need to know that things will actually change. What do you need?" "I need a full public apology from the bank. I need Sarah Wellington reinstated with back pay and all charges dropped. I need an independent investigation into every vendor payment Brandon approved. I need complete restructuring of compliance protocols with my authority as absolute and non-negotiable. And I need Brandon permanently barred from any role at this bank. If you can agree to all of that, we can talk about me coming back." There was a pause. Then Elizabeth said, "Done. All of it. When can you start?" I started back at Pacific Commerce Bank the following Monday. When I walked through the main entrance at 8 o'clock in the morning, something unexpected happened. The employees in the lobby started clapping. Angela ran over and hugged me, crying. Marcus high-fived me. People I barely knew came up to shake my hand and tell me they were glad I was back. My new office was on the executive floor, corner suite with windows overlooking the Willamette River. Elizabeth had moved fast. My name was already on the door. Catherine, Chief Compliance Officer. My first meeting was with Elizabeth and the bank's attorneys. We reviewed every pending transaction in the frozen queue. One by one, I analyzed them. The $850,000 payment to Apex Strategic Marketing Solutions, rejected, flagged for investigation. The $600,000 payment to Lighthouse Consulting Group, rejected, flagged for investigation. The $720,000 payment to Summit Advisory Partners, rejected, flagged for investigation. The $2 million construction loan disbursement, approved, with apology letter to the customer and waiver of all late fees. The executive payroll, approved. The legitimate vendor payments, approved. By the end of the day, 20 of the 23 transactions had been processed. The 3 fraudulent payments remained frozen and flagged for federal investigators. The $720,000 payment to Summit Advisory Partners, rejected, flagged for investigation. You were doing your job, I told her. Brandon put you in an impossible position. That's on him, not you. I promoted her to senior analyst with a 15% raise. She became one of my most dedicated team members. Over the next 2 weeks, the full scope of Brandon's fraud emerged. Federal investigators, working with the documentation I provided and their own subpoenas of bank records, discovered that Brandon had funneled $4.7 million to shell companies over 3 months. Jason Hendricks, Brandon's college roommate, had operated 5 different fake vendor companies. The scheme was straightforward. Create a shell company, submit an invoice for fake consulting services, pressure junior staff to process the payment, split the money. Harold had not been directly involved in the fraud, but he had ignored every warning sign. He had dismissed my concerns because he did not want family conflict. The board forced him to forfeit his pension for failure to report suspected fraud. His reputation was destroyed. His brother, Brandon's father, publicly cut ties with him, saying in a statement that Harold had enabled Brandon's worst instincts. Brandon was arrested on federal charges: wire fraud, bank fraud, and conspiracy. He faced up to 20 years in prison. His smug LinkedIn post about tough leadership was screenshot and mocked across social media. Every article about the case included the Facebook Live video of him firing me, now presented not as bold leadership but as the arrogance of a criminal who thought he was untouchable. Jason Hendricks was arrested the same day. 2 other associates involved in the shell companies were charged as well. The full criminal complaint was 53 pages long. In the 3rd week after my return, I received a letter in the mail at my office. It was from Brandon, sent through his attorney's office. It was handwritten on yellow legal paper. I almost threw it away without reading it, but something made me open it. Catherine, I know you have no reason to read this, and I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that I was wrong about everything. I thought I was smarter than everyone. I thought experience didn't matter. I thought the rules were for other people. I destroyed your career and Sarah's life because I was arrogant and stupid. I thought being the CEO's nephew meant I could do whatever I wanted. I was wrong. You tried to protect the bank, and I treated you like garbage. I deserve what's coming to me. You deserved better than how I treated you. I'm sorry. It was the first time he had taken any real responsibility. I felt no satisfaction reading it, just sadness at the waste of it all. Brandon was 27 years old. He could have learned. He could have listened. Instead, he destroyed his own life and hurt a lot of people along the way. I filed the letter away and got back to work. 3 months after I returned to Pacific Commerce Bank, the transformation was complete. I had rebuilt the compliance department from the ground up. We now had 12 compliance professionals, up from the 4 we had before. Every vendor approval went through a 3-part verification process. Every large transaction required dual authorization. Every employee received mandatory training on regulatory requirements and ethical decision-making. Most importantly, we created a culture where compliance was seen as protection, not obstacle. Elizabeth made it clear in every meeting, every email, every conversation. We would rather lose business than violate regulations. We would rather move slowly than cut corners. We would rather be cautious than clever. The regulatory audit that fall gave us perfect marks. The auditor's report specifically praised our comprehensive compliance framework and demonstrated commitment to ethical banking practices. Employee satisfaction scores reached the highest levels in company history. People felt safe speaking up. They knew their concerns would be heard. I was invited to speak at the National Banking Compliance Conference in Chicago. I stood in front of 300 compliance professionals and told my story. I talked about the importance of documentation, the necessity of speaking up even when it costs you something, and the long-term value of integrity. I told them, when you're the person saying no, when you're the one slowing things down to do them right, it's easy to feel like the problem. But you're not the problem. You're the solution. And eventually, the truth comes out. Do the right thing and document everything. The speech went viral in banking industry circles. I started getting job offers from major institutions. I turned them all down. Pacific Commerce Bank was my home. We had work to do, and I was going to see it through. 6 months after my return, Harold requested a meeting. I almost said no, but Elizabeth encouraged me to hear him out. He looked 20 years older than the last time I had seen him. Stress and shame had carved deep lines in his face. He sat across from my desk and could barely make eye contact. "Catherine, I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that you were right about everything. I enabled Brandon because I loved my brother, and I didn't want family conflict. I ignored your warnings because facing the truth was uncomfortable. I destroyed my own legacy and nearly destroyed this bank. You saved us, and I treated you terribly." He took a shaky breath. "You taught me something important, though it cost me everything to learn it. Loyalty to people who do wrong isn't loyalty, it's cowardice. Real loyalty means holding people accountable, especially the ones you love. I failed at that. You didn't." I did not absolve him. Some things cannot be fixed with apologies. But I accepted his words and told him I hoped he learned from his mistakes. 1 year after the Facebook Live firing, I sat in my office looking out at the city. Pacific Commerce Bank was thriving. Elizabeth had been made permanent CEO. Sarah was now a compliance manager, one of my most trusted advisors. Angela had been promoted to vice president of operations. The junior employees Brandon had intimidated now felt empowered to speak up. I was dating someone I met at the compliance conference, a risk management consultant who understood my world. I was speaking at universities about ethics in finance. I was writing a book about compliance and integrity. I was happy. The previous week, I had been training a new analyst, a young woman named Jenna, fresh out of college, with an eager energy that reminded me of myself at her age. She asked me, "How do you handle it when executives push back on compliance requirements?" I smiled. "You stand firm. You document everything. You remember that rules exist to protect people, not to obstruct business. And you never, ever compromise your integrity for someone else's convenience. Because at the end of the day, your signature means something, your name means something, and no job, no promotion, no approval from any executive is worth losing yourself. Jenna nodded, absorbing this. She would face her own challenges. Every compliance officer does. But she would be ready. I looked out my window at the Portland skyline. I thought about that day in the parking lot, sitting in my car with a box of my belongings, humiliated and broken. I thought about who I was now. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you is actually the beginning of your best life. But only if you refuse to compromise who you are. Only if you stand firm when it would be easier to bend. My firing on Facebook Live felt like the end of everything. It turned out to be the beginning of everything. Not because of luck, but because I had spent 15 years doing things right. I had documentation. I had integrity. I had relationships built on trust and competence. And when the crisis came, those things saved me. They saved Sarah. They saved the bank. They saved every customer who depended on us to follow the rules that protect their money. Brandon thought he was making me obsolete when he fired me. He actually made me indispensable. Because you can replace a person, but you cannot replace years of knowledge, relationships built on trust, and a reputation for doing what is right, even when it costs you something. If someone treats you like you are disposable, prove them wrong, not by seeking revenge, but by being so good at what you do, so essential, so committed to excellence, that the truth becomes undeniable. Your worth is not determined by who recognizes it. Your worth is determined by what you do when no one is watching, how you treat people when you have power, and whether you can sleep at night knowing you did the right thing. I can sleep at night now. Brandon cannot. Harold cannot. That is justice. If someone treats you like you are disposable, prove them wrong, not by seeking revenge, but by being so good at what you do, so essential, so committed to excellence, that the truth becomes undeniable. The AML regulations that froze those transactions were not red tape. They were protection. They were the rules that keep our financial system honest. They were the reason Brandon could not just steal $4.7 million and walk away. The system worked because people like me, people who care about details and rules and doing things properly, refuse to take shortcuts. So if you work in compliance, if you work in any field where you are responsible for making sure things are done right, know this: your work matters. When you slow things down to verify information, when you ask uncomfortable questions, when you document concerns, you are protecting people. You might not get thanked. You might get fired on Facebook Live. But eventually, the truth comes out. And when it does, the people who stood firm, who did things the right way even when it was hard, those are the people who rise. Document everything. Stand up for yourself and for people who cannot stand up for themselves. Remember that viral humiliation is temporary, but integrity is forever. Brandon thought the regulations were obstacles. They were actually guardrails, and the moment he tried to bypass them, those guardrails caught him. The system that protected everyone from his fraud was the same system he mocked and ignored. I want to leave you with this question, and I really want you to think about it. Have you ever been in a situation where doing the right thing cost you something? Maybe you spoke up about something wrong at work and faced backlash. Maybe you stood up for someone and got pushed aside. Maybe you refused to compromise your values and it seemed like you lost because of it. I want to hear your stories. Have you ever had a moment where your integrity was tested? What did you do? And looking back, do you think you made the right choice? Share your experiences in the comments below. Your story might help someone else who is facing that same choice right now. Someone out there needs to hear that standing firm is worth it, even when it is hard. If this story resonated with you, if it reminded you that doing the right thing matters, even when it costs you everything. Please, hit that like button. It helps other people find this story, and maybe it will reach someone who needs to hear it today. And please subscribe to this channel. I share stories about real people facing real challenges, stories about integrity and justice, and the long journey toward making things right. There are more stories coming, and I think you will find them worth your time. Finally, share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Maybe you know someone who is struggling at work, someone who feels pressured to compromise their values, someone who is treated unfairly and does not know if speaking up will make a difference. Send them this story. Let them know they are not alone. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for being here. I hope that whatever challenges you are facing right now, you remember that your integrity is worth protecting, that documentation is your best friend, and that the truth has a way of coming out if you are patient and strong enough to wait for it. Stand firm, do right, and never let anyone make you feel small for having standards. Take care of yourselves. I will see you in the next story.